subjective relationship to real life. That's the biggest kind of term I think that we can come to. That was something that Simon said at the very beginning. Ethics is the subjective relationship to real life. It is infinitely demanding and unfulfillable, which is why it takes commitment. Politics is infinite demand plus location. That's the biggest way we can explain politics. Aesthetics is sensation. And sensation is, at its basics, me, or the individual, in relation to the common horizon. Art is a vehicle for communication, which in the last 20 years is where conversations between different genres, different art forms, different like scientists, politicians, activists have come together. So art has become this kind of space, if you like, for conversations to happen. Performance is the most immediate form of art. It exists at the convergence of art, ethics, and aesthetics. And it creates a bridge between concept and audience. Again, just to reiterate, I'm taking this from like parts of different things that people have said. So the act of performance is the trace of change, and it's the footprint of life. So perhaps the success is the speed at which it goes from real life into myth status. Or perhaps it's success, or perhaps it's not even success that we're talking about. Perhaps it's relevance. Performance's relevance is if it becomes symbolic. The question is whether it actually needs to kind of exist or remain in real life, or if it's possible for it to remain in real life, because of the fact that it's transient. So Anatoly yesterday said something that I thought was pretty important, which was, he said that ethics is the hottest topic because 20 years have passed since the 1990s and nothing has happened. Nastio, at the beginning of yesterday, turned around and said that perhaps we are the transition team. I.e., there's a question as to whether anything, you know, we've got this whole conversation around ethics and performance and ethics and action. But I suppose what I want to put out there right now is like, what does that actually mean? What is it that we want? We've heard so many different perspectives and different responses towards what ethics is, what aesthetics is, what performance is. What do we want? If we are the transition team, or if ethics is the hottest topic because 20 years have passed since the 1990s and nothing has happened, what do we want now?
Hello. I don't know, what do we want? What do I want? I want to be as effective as I can possibly be presenting a possibility, a perspective. I'm very concerned about how effective I can transmit an idea, a possibility, whether that is something extremely tangible or something that is intangible. So to be effective in putting a possibility out there, I think it's a big step for it to become that myth, for lack of a better expression, for it to become more than symbolic, but to have an impact in people's lives. And to through that, to be able to present really something that people can use as individuals, whether that has an impact on the quality of their sex life, or the quality of the relationship they have with their mother, or indeed the relationship they have with their state or organisms of social authority. So this is what I mentioned, the word opportunity as well. I think that these discussions, once we go, which I guess it is a necessity to expose and to debate and present, even to suggest or to refine our theoretical positioning, there must be a consequence to all of this. I be arrogant enough to say that we want to make it count.
Is there anybody in the audience that wants to say something about what they want or what they feel about the fact that like ethics has been a hot topic because of the fact that nothing has happened?
Можно мне? Я хочу сказать, что нельзя вот утверждать, что вообще ничего не изменилось. В нашем контексте, мне кажется, изменилось многое. Во всяком случае, в 90-е у нас были надежды. Эти надежды связывались и с эстетическими какими-то перспективами, и, безусловно, с этическими переменами, которые мы возлагали вот на изменившуюся ситуацию касательно власти, касательно веры, касательно вот этих двух вещей, которые Толя тоже совершенно справедливо заметил как болезненные. Да, в этом смысле не изменилась наша заинтересованность, причем глубинная заинтересованность этими проблемами власти и веры. Но у нас нет драйва, у нас нет вот каких-то надежд с этими проблемами связанными. Вот что касается этой проблемы. У меня много возникло как-то вопросов, но я думаю, что это отдельная история. Вот то, что я хотела сказать по поводу изменения. Очень многое изменилось, да, еще я добавлю, например, связано с женским перформансом. Мы проскочили как-то вот эту ситуацию, когда мы могли бы с этим поработать. То есть, с одной стороны, это была one-way коммуникация, то есть мы смотрели на то, что делалось в западной феминистской парадигме, после после знакомства с западным феминистским теоретизированием. И сейчас мы уже имеем ситуацию музеификации этого. И это несколько меня настораживает и пугает, потому что вот та параэстетика, которая родилась в феминистском теоретизировании, феминистских практиках перформанса, то есть вот эстетика недоговоренности, эстетика противоречивости, она, попадая в музей, наверняка что-то теряет. И я восхищаюсь, конечно, вот этим процессом архивации. Я все-таки побаиваюсь, что мы теряем этот дух женского перформанса, который не ровесник авангарда, который родился действительно в связи с критикой его. И, ну, ладно, этого, наверное, достаточно.
Thank you, Yuri.
I would speak from the position of a curator. Yes, it takes time. I would speak from the position of a curator. What do we want if I accept the challenge and I would say in few words, we want discourse because it's changed a lot. In 18 years of my work at the gallery, the space for conveying the messages is shrinking constantly. And we are constantly and more in conflict with society on different levels, which is posing us difficult questions. Well, they are not so difficult. They are mostly preconceptions, banalizations. They are not willing to participate in discourse. And on our side, we are not having a proper repertoire to address them. So this is what I believe we need to do more conferences like this. Because we need to create a certain degree of freedom. And we need to rise the discourse by having arguments. The conference that we had a week ago was dedicated exactly to that, because the scientists who are working with artists, they keep demanding us to provide an approval of an ethical committee for the artist work where the scientists are collaborating. This way, they will be covered. And I see the position of scientists as a symptom. because their autonomy, it's really tiny, tiny, tiny. While the artists are still having some place, but it's vanishing. So I think that by developing the discourse, we can raise the banal and trivial debate in public and really have a fruitful public debate.
Maybe I'm wrong and impulsive in this replica, but from my point of view, Anatoly was right, and nothing has changed, but nothing has changed since Romeo and Juliet. And I mean that some artists need to get a blessing from the clergyman to start their performance in an institution. Others, for instance, two young artists rejected our suggestion to take part in those archival interviews just because these interviews were initiated by a capitalist institution. This is two polar situations, and everyone decides for him or herself what is good and what is wrong, bad. That's, in this sense, for me, nothing has changed for these 20 years. Thank you.
Over the last 2 days, we have heard a few different ways that we could think about ethics and performance. It's quite interesting. We started off with ethics in action. It was then suggested that ethics is action, and then ethics born of action. And I found this quite interesting, this kind of slippage. And the kind of changes in emphasis, I think, depends on your understanding of performance in relation to context. And context, going back to what Simon was suggesting in very basic terms, context is the kind of location in relation to infinite demand of politics. So on the other hand, Laura Lima was talking about the fact that you understand context to be location, to be material, to be kind of architectural, if you like, or in relation to that. So there's now something very important, I think, to add to that, which has been discussed throughout the 2 days, which is the relationship to media as well, and in particular social media, and the speed at which things are being processed or being kind of in contact with the public or the audience. It's like, even if it starts off quite small. So I'm trying to work out, it's a big question for me, if ethics is action or in action or born of action, and it's in relation to context, but context is now being shifted because of media. What does this mean, or what do people think about this kind of added aspect of media in relation to what we started off with?
I think there's been a movement in the last. I think that the media is hell. I mean, we live in a kind of hell of fake immediacy through different platforms. And what's interested me in the last 10 years or so has been the attempt amongst certain groups, political groups, to refuse visibility and to refuse names, refuse an idea of being named. I mean, the most obvious example of this is in France, La Comité Invisible and Tarnac and groups like this, where in a sense one ethical strategy becomes a refusal of visibility, a refusal of being named, a refusal of anything that could be mediated in some way. So I think in a sense we've reached a kind of position where there's such, you see this in relationship to obviously cameras here and documentation. There was a time when talks were not documented, and I think that was great. You know, everything is documented. Why is everything documented? Everything is an archive. So I think for me there's a question around that, the politics of the archive, the politics of documentation, and it just raises a question for me about how I mean, we live in this, I mean, you know, I see no reason why art should conspire with ideology, or an ideology of connection, right? The idea of being connected. I think there's a sense in which disconnection, invisibility, neutrality, anonymity are, in a sense, strategies of resistance at the present moment which might be at least thought through. It's an anti-media position, I guess.
Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, I would just say, because I don't want to be biased or about what I'm concerned about and lose track of what the proposition for the conference is. But again, when you mention Romeo and Juliet, you know, I go towards effectiveness of presenting something, and how I don't know, without media, without communication, the sense of what is it that you are putting out there when it comes to context, you know, because I tend to use all I can, whenever I can, all the time that is possible. Thinking also is on the putting the idea out there. I don't have a particular deep intellectual, ideological relationship with the internet and all the platforms that make it possible. But I do think that they can be useful. But at the end of the day, the relevance of something being documented or not documented, or the discussions that are archived or not archived, will survive based on how effective, how they touch, how they communicate, how they establish themselves. And ultimately, again, just because I will sleep better tonight, I'll try to make the connection with ethics that brings. They're always going to be, and I hope, I don't even have to hope, it's natural. There are going to be things that are going to be ethical, things are not going to be ethical. They need to be done. And I think these debates, as Yuri puts, are important if we are addressing the opportunity that this brings, you know, that we coming together, and at the end of the day, I don't know, am I wrong? Is this something, is effectiveness not something that we are want to be effective on putting out whatever it is, and how do we connect our ideas, our points of view with particular proposals that are put out there? I keep, I don't know, coming to this shit.
If you please, just two words. For me, it's also quite clear that ethics, of course, it is an action, but it comes after the action connected to media. Because, for instance, another young artist made a quite radical performance which only 2 people knew about. And all these senses he invested in his action just disappeared. And there is nothing to keep about, not even a memory to keep about his act, deed. And that's why artists of 90s used mass media as the only archive which can spread around their ideas.
I wanted to respond to Simon's point of invisibility as an act as a response. I think you have to be in a position to have a voice to then choose invisibility. I think that, and I think I completely agree on a personal level. I agree in terms of not existing online, for example. I really, on a very personal level, I agree. But I remember very much along the lines of what you just said, recently talking to an artist, and she said to me, you know, I'm making a stand. I'm not making any more work. And then, small pause, but nobody is noticing. Because, you know, she's not a well-known artist. And that is important. You know, you can have a very strong stand, but only in a situation where somebody cares. So, you know, in the instances where I was talking about this black hole over the former East, there you need to have a different position, because you can choose invisibility, but ain't gonna get you far. Yeah, it was just that.
These strategies are actually implemented by the government, by the media, by the positions of power, even better than the artists are implementing it. You know, this passive aggression by not being present, by not reacting, and so how many artworks, you know, were addressing loudly the positions of power, but the power just waited. No? So the message went in vain, that evaporated, you know, and these are the strategies of withdrawal that they know much better than many artists who is using it. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like also to comment on the invisibility, because a lot of my work is actually focused on making this, making visible a lot of different discriminations, and so the whole politics of my work is actually of making visible the mechanisms of power. And for example, I talked precisely today about how systematically Roma people have been excluded and subjected to systematic exclusion and racisms all over Europe. And so I see my artistic thing in a rising visibility of that, and not only visibility in the terms of information, but precisely in a building the solidarity on a long term, and doing also smaller projects like a media corrections about certain situations, the way, for example, Roma are reported about in Serbia, Serbian media, for example, or
perhaps another thing that's been brought up a number of times that we haven't kind of got to yet, and I'm not sure that we want to, because I think we want questions, but it's about this word commitment keeps coming up. It started off with Simon at the very beginning, and then we've flirted with this word a lot. And it's whether it's commitment to invisibility, to visibility. There's something about intimate access or explicit access to something. It's like Song Dong was like dealing very much with the kind of giving people access to something that's very intimate. You're giving people something access by kind of making it explicit. So there's kind of different approaches to a kind of a commitment to communicating in some way.
And building up emotion about the issues. I think that's also very important, and what I would like to see coming in relation to the issues and the histories.
People out there. Burning questions.
У нас есть вопрос.
Добрый вечер. Меня зовут Максим Илюхин, я художник из Москвы. Я хочу попросить Роузли Голдберг и Сашу Обухову за 60 секунд, каждую из вас, хочу попросить за 60 секунд рассказать какой-нибудь перформанс.
Okay, why not? Who will start? If you want, you can start. The question is, he asked us in 60 seconds to tell one performance as a plot drama.
I can't do it, sorry. Will you come and help me? I can't think of something that fast. Oh, yeah, Sasha?
For instance, our Moscow artist Alexei Kalima, on the day of president elections, took insecticide chalk and draw a white line around Kremlin. That's it. It was in 2000. I have few seconds left.
Еще один вопрос из зала.
Добрый вечер. Спасибо за такой интересный разговор. И мне кажется, одной из очень важных фраз, ключевых фраз этих 2 дней была фраза Жана-Люка Годара о том, что этика — это эстетика будущего. И мне кажется, прозвучали еще некоторые очень интересные, возможно, такие вот установки на будущее. Настя говорил много о возможности, opportunity, и говоря о неком единстве этики, эстетики и политики, о возможном единстве. И вопрос такой: каким, на ваш взгляд, мог бы быть манифест перформативного искусства сегодня, и возможно ли вообще такой манифест? Спасибо.
If ethics is the aesthetics of the future, what is the manifesto of the performance artist today or in the future? Is that what you were asking? Who's going to take it?
Well, you know, it's one of the problems, one of the issues I think these days. Actually, I just realized it took me 5 minutes to answer your question, but I think what I talked about before were probably my favorite 60 seconds about any artist, what they had to say. I think the aesthetics of the future and the kind of argument and discussion that Yuri was talking about, the non-stop investigation, these are all things that I think will construct the manifestos of the future. I don't think every manifesto from each artist is as individual and different as the number of artists in this room. I mean, there is no single manifesto. We could try to come out with, the last international or something, come out of this and write a manifesto. Maybe that's what we have to do over dinner. But indeed, I think manifestos are hard to come by. They don't come by in a quick answer. And I think, again, the history of art has shown us that manifestos, and there were so many of them in the early 1900s, came about with groups of people meeting, arguing, drinking lots of wine, having lots of gouloirs in Paris, and fighting out ideas, throwing things at each other, throwing Breton out the room, bringing him back, kicking him in the pants, whatever. There's a lot of argument that goes into what this dimension is. So I don't want to simplify it. I don't want to simplify by picking my favorite artist. I don't have one. I think there's context. I mean, for me, that ethics is the aesthetics of the future. It just kept ringing in my head the whole way coming in from New York. It's actually a song. Now we can go to a song by Laurie Anderson. It was one of the songs that is in her tape bow. And interestingly, what she did, she tape recorded into the bow that sentence, ethics is the aesthetics of the future. But guess what? She pulled the bow across and she stopped just before it got to the full end. And it said, ethics is the aesthetics of the few. So that's another question. And maybe I leave with, I have this big empty question that I'm not even, I could probably throw it to Simon because he's our resident philosopher and he can turn it back at me. But, what is we talk about ethics as though it's something that you decide upon. I thought that ethics was almost as a part of an existential being, that it is part of being human, that to be ethical is to be a human being. And what is the absence of ethics? Is that fascism? Is that a certain, is that the Chelsea Art Gallery? I don't know. What is the absence of ethics? What do we mean by that? I mean, I think every artist that takes the challenge on to be an artist, to make statements, to dare to have the courage to put themselves out in that world and feel that they are being effective, that they are saying something, like Nastya, that he wants to say something, he wants to be effective, wants to change your mind, wants to make you feel more deeply, see more in more interesting ways. I mean, these are all, you know, in political science, this is all about the idea of the good. And I think the search for the good is something that artists are constantly doing. So maybe I would put that back to you about this idea of, well, what is the absence of ethics? I thought we were all ethical beings. I mean, isn't that our first calling in life, is to be, it's the sort of first thing you're taught in life, is to take ethics very seriously.
It depends what we mean by ethics. What you said at the end there about the ethics of an artist, that strikes me as absolutely right. And that would be a kind of paradigm for an ethics of commitment, in my view. I mean, yesterday I was talking about you can't make a hard and fast distinction between ethics and morality. One is derived from a Greek word, one's derived from a Latin word. So that doesn't really work. But loosely, you could say that there are, you know, to be human is to be born into certain sets of mores, certain sets of habits, dispositions, which make up a set of what used to be called morals in the 19th century. And so to be human is to exist within a certain moral universe. And that moral universe is by definition specific to a context. And then there can be disagreements amongst different moral universes. And those are the origins of things like religious war and the rest. So there's that. So to be human is to exist within a certain moral space, you could say. But the conception of ethics that I was trying to explain yesterday, for me, is that this is me. It's not, you know, it doesn't have to go for anybody else. But for me, ethics consists in a commitment, an existential commitment to go against existing morality. Right? So the ethical, for me, really consists in that existential stand to call into question existing morality. And to that extent, the work of, I guess, most artists that I am aware of and most people in the room would be ethical in that sense. So to that might be one way of talking about it.
Thank you, because maybe I suddenly finally did understand the title, Ethics in Action. And maybe we are saying something a little bit different, which is that performance, because it has no market, and let's take away the current discussion about how do we collect performance, which is a pretty artificial, new market-driven idea, and all kinds of other things we could attach to it. But I think working in performance, maybe that is ethics in action, because there is nothing to buy or sell.
Yes.
There is no commodity to trade in, and maybe that's finally I finally understood the title. Thank you.
Yeah, but on the other hand, what comes to my mind now, it's, you know, when there were artists already in the 70s that somehow were aware to document what they were doing. So you find a lot of artists who did performance actions, even in the galleries. You have a lot of examples in former Yugoslavia, like the first performances started in the galleries, like the Student Cultural Center and so on. And somehow some of them, is it by accident or be aware that there's a lot of documentation? And even like I'm talking Western and Eastern Europe, and some of them, you talk to them, they describe you these fabulous things, and they have a little photo, or they lost it, they don't know where is it. So, but what happened with those who have this documentation is that suddenly this documentation, which was taken by an accidental photographer or not, it has such a value in the market that is incredible. So you have this moment of those actions, those artistic practices that somehow were there to subvert the existing one, you know, to really making a shift in the time they had a shift. And suddenly they're entering institutions and the market raising the prices so high. So that's problematic for me. And I know we are facing that in the meeting. Though suddenly they're really, some prices are outrageous. So suddenly you're creating there is a market for performance somehow, and the new artistic practices are there. And that's, I think, for me, I think that one of the reasons why dance is now also so present, because still there is no market for dance, although it's starting already. So for me, this idea of thinking about ethics, this was really, I was just thinking now also what you said. So that's a problematic question for me.
Well, another way of spinning this would be that the
Sorry, just to say, and then
Yeah.
you have countries that have still no market. Like if you think for former Yugoslavia, there's, okay, in Slovenia, yes, but in other countries there's not a single commercial gallery. And in Slovenia, at least there is one. Yeah, which is based in Berlin, yeah.
But the artists did not make money when those little photographs were sold.
No, but now, you know.
Now they're making money.
Yeah.
Well, again, you know, just
some of them, and it's nothing bad in making
Right.
money. You know, maybe this change in a
No.
way for some of them, not for all
look,
of them.
any
but
way to support artists, I think that's not a bad thing. So let's support the artists and make the museums do that. That's not such a bad idea.
But I mean, the point you make is great. But what about? Has anybody talked about Tino Segal's work in that
we
regard?
haven't
Exactly.
mentioned
Because
because
Tino would be the quintessence of that. Because what you're buying is nothing.
Well,
You're
he's
buying
also
the-
a dancer. We should never forget
Yeah,
that.
you're buying the
he
instructions to
studied
carry out
economy and
performance.
dance, yes, and he combined the two very well in visual art.
And the
yeah.
value of the work is linked to its unavailability in that sense. Yeah, I agree with you.
There's a question there. Okay, yeah.
Yes,
Everybody
just
put their hand up
вопрос
and wants to
из
say something. There was one question back there first. Haim. And then, yeah, can everybody put their hand up that wants to say something? Because I want to make sure that everybody says something who wants
Девушка,
to.
вопрос из зала.
No, actually, I wanted to ask a question.
Oh.
So can I ask it now, or is it better to?
It's Haim first because he was
Yeah,
the one that was
sure.
like most urgent, and then. But I promise everybody gets to ask what they want. Go for it. Yes, you can ask the question now because you have the mic.
Thank you. I have a question to Simon, but also other participants of the discussion who would like to comment. Yesterday you talked about ethics in the light of aesthesis, which means that ethics involves sensation and maybe emotion. And rather than distance in the sense of like the absence of practical interest in the sense of Kant, now ethics assumes this emotional participation and engagement. And so my first question is, does this aesthetic participation and engagement differs from common life, like everyday life participation and engagement? And secondly, does this ethical participation requires some sort of intellectual comprehension, like making sense of it and maybe producing a theory like avant-garde did, because they had this maybe even common life and everyday life participation, but then they make a theory of that. But now it seems that no theory is produced. So the first question, does it differ from everyday life, and does it need a theory to? Yeah, thank you.
I guess it would be a, you know, one view would be an idealization of what might be possible in everyday life, and the theory would be internal to the practice. You could say something like that in response to both questions. But then there's a question that I think is being raised now. An old friend of mine, Claire Bishop, you know, Claire Bishop's work, and I mean, Claire, you know, participatory hells, and the idea that the ethic of participation and collaboration is a kind of another awful thing we've got ourselves into. And I, you know, yeah. So I look at things. I'm not an artist, and I'm not in the art world. I'm really not. I just look at certain things. But it strikes me that the interest recently in outsider art, in the Venice Biennale and elsewhere, and also is a kind of an attempt to find something that would be outside this participatory hell that we've built for ourselves. And I'm not sure. I think the things shift, and there's definitely now a move against the whole emphasis upon relationality that's been strong in the last 20 years, right? That moment seems to have exhausted itself, and now we're into some different sequence for which I guess we'll try and find a name.
Haim?
Это скорее риторический вопрос. Это скорее риторический вопрос, хотя я его задаю сам себе как художнику постоянно, особенно в последнее время. В негативной диалектике Адорно, да, задает вопрос, возможно ли и какое, да, искусство после Освенцима. Перефразируя, хотя он там размышляет, но не говорит, что оно невозможно, он размышляет о том, какое оно может быть. Но перефразируя этот вопрос, я задаю себе вопрос, возможно ли искусство во время Освенцима, да, или если приблизить к нашим реалиям, возможно ли искусство во время Бирюлева, бирюлевских погромов в Москве, или когда в 2013 году для мигрантов в Москве делают лагеря. И вот какого рода искусство может быть в такой ситуации? Вот,
I would like to take on this question, if you don't mind. I appreciate your question, and I think if we look through the history of civilization and the history of art, and if we look nowadays also still to the few existing tribal cultures, and if we look like what the role of art was playing in the society, actually the culture, and it was all one, and I could see art could heal itself only if it goes this direction. So if it gets recuperated back from the kind of commercial discourse and gets involved in the healing of the society, both with the kind of political and neoliberal trauma that some of what you have mentioned, I could see it as like in an intense exchange with the other disciplines, that it could play a very interesting role. Important.
Does anybody have a different perspective on that? Snejana?
Hello, sorry, I'm one of the organizers, probably shouldn't be asking questions, should let the public, but I am really want to ask this question. Thinking about where we are now, which is Moscow, Russia, we're all sitting here, and we all know that Russia has a history of radical performances. So I was wondering I actually would like to hear a little bit from each one of you. What is, in your opinion, how do you perceive radicality today, now, here? What is radical? Because in my opinion, just having this conference is already a radical gesture in this context, but maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you can prove me wrong. Yeah, that's basically my question. Did we miss something in these 2 days? Did we miss to talk about something in these 2 days? Thank you.
Who's starting?
Conference, it was great, but I don't think it's a radical thing. It's definitely something that should naturally happen here, and it's great that you put such an amazing effort to arrange it here.
I think it's pretty radical. Again, as you say, taken out of context, it's not New York, which this happens every day, morning, noon, and night. But yeah, I do think it's radical. I think it's radical that history is being revisited. I think radical is Yvonne Rainer, she's 80 years old. I think radical is, I think it is possible to maintain a radical ethos, a radical ethics throughout one's life, and to remain radical all the time, because you're having to ask that question is exactly, what are we doing? What are we doing as artists? What are we doing as, nice privileged people sitting here with our degrees and our nice, ways of getting around the world these days? There's a radical position to what it means to be art historians and the kind of humanism that we have to protect. So I think the need to be forever radical is very important, because I think forever radical is always asking those questions.
I really have to take on this, because I think the radical people, they're in jail.
Just a second, because Snejana wanted to hear from everybody, so I just want to make sure that other people get the chance to say something.
Okay, can I just have a short replic to what Rosalind has said? I think we heard yesterday some of the history of the Russian radical art scene, and we know that people that were mentioned, they are all in jail or they had to escape this country. So I think that's the radical part. I think we are not here radical enough, but it's very important and I greatly appreciate it.
May I also put something in this discussion? First of all, I'm not sure that everyone among artists who is in jail or in immigration are radical, and not all of the radical are in jail. But I would like to point out the meaning of the word radical. Radical means root, radix. So it is always a personal choice to go to the root, as a Pasternak poem, to the very matter of contemporarity of nowadays, and to start thinking and to be responsible for it. Sorry.
Да, если можно. Я не теоретизируя, а просто скажу как участница событий радикального перформанса, в частности о своем сотрудничестве с Олегом Куликом. И продолжая Сашину линию вот о том, что совершенно не обязательно, чтобы быть радикальным, действительно сделать какой-то такой жест, за который непременно последует срок тюремный. Вот, скажем, для того периода достаточно радикальным была такая инфильтрация медиа. Я совершенно согласна с Саймоном, что действительно медиа, масс-медиа – это ад. Но я подозреваю, что рай нам просто не светит никому. И вот эта вот инфильтрация медиа, которая для последующих лет все время всплывала в связи с радикальностью, то в качестве обвинения, то в качестве одобрения, но, очевидно, в качестве потребности тоже. Потому что вот сегодня, например, мне показалось, что крайне радикальным была презентация Сундуна. И это вот может быть тот самый, такие островки рая, которые нам еще доступны. То есть это очень просто, это не требует никакой дополнительной медиального обеспечения, но при этом это безумно трогательно. Это действует напрямую. Я не знаю, как можно ли это музеифицировать. Наверное, можно. Но вот эта вот простота жеста, это китайский язык, наверное, тоже. Да? То есть вот какие-то такие вещи, которые мне кажутся действительно несколько райскими на этом фоне. Но при том, что радикальность этого жеста инфильтрации медиа, она остается и актуальной, и достаточно радикальной, может быть. Я не уверена в этом. Я не уверена в том, что это радикально для всех. То есть, извините, я еще... То есть раз мы договорились, что этика имеет такой локальный акцент, то вот я как раз хотела, чтобы это выглядело именно проблематично.
Если можно продолжить... Если можно продолжить линию не теоретизирующего отклика на ваш вопрос, то из русского, российского современного контекста и из моего личного контекста я бы отвечала на него так. Здесь, конечно, есть двоякое отношение, такая вот расщелина, которая возникает во мне как в зрителе радикального перформанса. Одна сторона моя сожалеет и сочувствует человеку, который вынужден и которого подтолкнуло что-то, его личная ответственность толкает на крайние меры. Это, здесь сожаление, наверное, довольно слабое слово, но, в общем, спектр чувств, которые заставляет сострадателя грустить. И с другой стороны, я очень благодарна этим жестам за то, что они актуализируют или ставят передо мной вновь границу между насилием и катарсисом. То есть в этот момент меня заставляют на что-то посмотреть, но тем не менее вызывают меня из небытия и снова позволяют мне обрести какие-то черты критического мышления. И за это можно быть только, ну, как бы чувствовать к этим людям большую благодарность и эмпатию. Да, вот я бы так ответила на этот вопрос. Спасибо.
У нас еще один вопрос.
Добрый вечер, меня зовут...
Hang on. There's one, Magda wanted to make a response.
Yes, I wanted to respond to the radicality and maybe push it to a little bit different direction by some observation that struck me at some point. And I think, like, I don't know Moscow context enough, but what I felt as a radical, extreme radicalism in art is when the artists admit that the art does not fulfill their expectation in a way, that the art stopped have meaning for them. And I think it's really radical to admit it at some point, and on the other is this gesture of withdrawal from art, which I think happens. I don't think it's a feature of time, or if it's or a characteristic of a generation. I think it's a very personal thing because it's happening in the history, and to ask this question and to admit it, that art does not fulfill your expectation, or does not carry meaning for you anymore after practicing it for certain time. I think that's for me the radicalism of art, I think.
The next question from the floor.
Добрый вечер, меня зовут Ольга, и я хотела бы задать следующий вопрос. Он заключается в том, что можно ли перформанс отнести к вечным искусствам? То есть, например, если его конкретизировать, то насколько следующее поколение лет через 20 смогут воспринять и оценить перформансы 90-х годов не только как реакцию художников на общественную ситуацию, но и как произведение искусства. Спасибо.
Если можно, я отвечу по привычке. Я думаю, что, безусловно, 20, 40, 60 лет пройдет то, что включено в этот реестр искусства, институциональный список художественности, там и останется. И это вопрос не признания или непризнания спустя время, а вопрос правильного или неправильного толкования. Может быть, это будет неверно истолковано, но точно не сможет быть вычеркнуто из искусства. Были попытки вычеркнуть из искусства супрематические работы Малевича, но как-то не очень удалось все-таки. Так что я думаю, что однажды, став частью художественного процесса, перформанс там и останется, по всей видимости. Ну, то есть, если вообще искусство как понятие останется в нашем языке, в нашем представлении о мире, а не окончательно сольется с жизнью.
Хотела бы действительно добавить, мне очень тоже приходило это в голову, особенно когда Анна говорила о том, что, может быть, через 10 лет мы перестанем говорить о перформансе. У меня тоже возникло опасение, а будем ли мы говорить об искусстве, об институциализованном искусстве, о музейном искусстве. Будем ли мы говорить об этом приватно? Будет ли это для нас вообще этической практикой? Это действительно большой вопрос, мне кажется.
Any more questions?
Нет, больше нет вопросов. Еще один вопрос.
There's one at the front.
And then I just want to say to the panelists, if there's anything that you want to say that hasn't been said, then come up with it after this question, and then we'll close there.
Я прошу прощения, я сегодня был первый день, может быть, это обсуждалось ранее, однако вот у нас сложилась довольно интересная ситуация, когда действительно художник подвергается уголовному преследованию за те или иные художественные высказывания, в частности, перформансы. И в России позиция общества почти всегда, позиция государства является также позицией общества, да, это некоторая традиционно сложившаяся ситуация. И каковы перспективы вообще развития этого вида деятельности художественной при именно такой ситуации? То есть у нас действительно богатая традиция преследования художников, и однако, грубо говоря, вот последний перформанс Петра Павленского, да, собственно, когда легко можно себе представить ситуацию, легко можно себе представить перформансы, за которые он собственно, он не подвергался до этого, никто не заводил дел и прочее, однако, собственно, последнее его высказывание, оно задело властей, и понятно, что, скажем, он уже оказался в ином поле, чем другие художники, которые обращаются к перформансам. И на самом деле, мне, например, не совсем понятно, что делать дальше. Это некоторая ситуация, не знаю, это не поэзия после Освенцима и не во время, но это какая-то очень близкая ситуация, когда именно художественное высказывание становится поводом для отчуждения человека из общества, да, какое им является уголовное преследование. И как к этому относиться? Относиться ли к этому как к искусству? Спасибо.
Вы знаете, если можно, вот я скажу, постараюсь как можно короче говорить об этом. Я просто хотела бы совсем в другую сторону развернуть эту проблематику и посмотреть на историю искусства в целом. В этой истории были ситуации, когда обычная картина или фреска становились поводом для судебных разбирательств, когда итог судебного разбирательства приводил к тому, что менялись очертания эстетического. Бывали такие случаи, когда страдал автор, бывали те случаи, когда он оставался цел и невредим. И в этом противостоянии искусства и власти, которое сегодня принимает перформативные формы, я не вижу особых отличий. То есть мы имеем новые медиа. В случае с Pussy Riot это видеоролик, загруженный в YouTube. Это могла быть картина, да, как в случае с Александром Савко. Единственное, на самом деле сейчас в тюрьме находятся 2 женщины, а единственное произведение искусства, запрещенное судом, это на самом деле картина художника Александра Савко. Вот это не вопрос медиа, это не вопрос технологии. Это вопрос противостояния искусства и власти. Этот вопрос вечный.
I would appreciate you taking this question as well, but from a slightly different perspective, if you don't mind. So I think not talking specifically on the case of Pussy Riot, but completely different. So I would like to talk about, for example, what consists art piece that works in the media of law. So once the art piece enters the media of law, and I think that everything that comes out of that art piece as a prosecution, as a sentence as a media reaction is a part of this art piece, because I think this art piece is challenging in the certain space. I've done a number of pieces that were working in the field of something that is considered non-legal in the countries where I've done it. But I think as an artist, we are not part out of the society and cannot be privileged in a way that because we have done it as an art, it shouldn't be, how to say, prosecuted by law, if you want. And in these terms, I think, in particular, when we look at the cases in which artists have done racist acts, and then for the sake of art, they are not prosecuted, it's a very problematic. So I think artists should take all the consequences of their artistic work, wherever that leads. Of course, we can look through this, what comes out of it, like as a court process or so on. We can look at the society in a different way and see how unjust it is, and so on and so on. But this was my intervention. Thank you.
I will also add something. You know, if the artist really wants to convey the message, you know, he or she will choose certain strategies to do that. It's not necessary performance. It's not necessary a media that we know. It's not necessary that it lasts half an hour. It can take 50 years, as we know. So there is no excuse that we are living in a world which is strengthening our environment. On the contrary, we need to be more and more active against it, and be smart and use the tactical media, use whatever we think that will help us to convey the message. While the artists are the most sensitive and creative people in this planet, they are definitely able to do that.
Thank you very much, Yuri. And I just want to find out if anybody wants to add anything before we wrap up the talking part of the conference.
I think to answer Snezhana what you said, if you miss something, you will know that in a month. It's just too early to know if we miss something. But what comes to my mind about radicality and commitment and ethics, I was just thinking, I don't know, a few weeks ago, in a museum perspective, it's even different. Like, what can be radical anymore, you know? There's like, what can be radical? Of course, when we talk about Pussy Riot, there's a certain very strong political context here, but I was thinking for that perspective, like I was in the museum, I was like, what can be radical anymore here? But then actually what it's also radical, it's a certain commitment. Again, if you think about artists who are dealing, like Marta Rosler, who is dealing with community and social issues since long time, or Sanja Vekovic with feminist issues in the 70s, or Ioan Grigorescu. I'm just talking artists that come to my mind. It was kind of a dissident in the Romania, but even today. So regardless now the market was I'm taking today, I think that this is also one form of important radicality, a certain commitment of the artist. And this is something that it usually comes to performance, but not necessarily. And I agree, this performance, we have to talk about it because there is a hype now, and we have to understand why it's happening. But as I said before, it's also part of the larger artistic practice, that we can't forget that.
Thank you. So with that, I want to wrap up, as I say, the talking part of this conference. Before I do, I just